Hey, how are you doing? In this video, we will be drawing Jello, jelly pudding. Not sure what it's exactly called, but I thought it would be very interesting to make a drawing of it because of the slight transparency, the reflections. I think it's just a nice texture. And as for the level, I think it's somewhere in between beginner and intermediate perhaps, but I think I'll be able to better judge that while I'm at it. So I've made a canvas. It's 3500 by 3500 pixels. And let's grab a reference image. You can just swipe up from the bottom of your screen to grab your favorite app for references. I'll be using Google Drive. And there I have a reference image of a jelly pudding. And you can just drag this to the left a little bit to make it smaller. Now this Jello is on a plate, but we'll just be drawing a Jello on a white background. So we'll just be focusing on the Jello. First thing I'd like to do is make a sketch. And we'll use the Sketch It brush for that. And it's in the illustration brush pack. And if you don't have that, then you can just use a pencil that's already in Procreate, like the HB pencil, for instance. Now I've picked a, almost black color, a very dark gray. And let me make the brush a little bit bigger. 55 seems nice. And now let's sketch out that basic shape of the Jello. That bottom part is a bit of an oval. And then it goes up diagonally. And we can make another circle there. That's like really the basic shape of the Jello. I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger. And we can just zoom out a little bit. So we're going diagonally up there. And then we have all these rounded parts. One in the middle. And then we'll go back round here. So I'll first make that bottom part. And then let's go up here. And at the top, it's rounded as well. And as always, you don't have to copy that reference exactly, but we do want to create Jello. We want to create that jelly pudding. So we're not going to draw squares here. And let's make a rounded shape here. And then we have those rounded shapes that are on the other side. I guess something like this. We can tweak it just a little bit. And if you have a really messy sketch, then you can just lower the opacity of this sketch layer and make a new sketch layer on top to refine your sketch. But I think we can make some Jello out of this. I think this is a nice sketch to get started painting. So let me duplicate this layer. You don't have to do this, but I will be saving this progress for you. So this will be step 1. And now we are going to make step 2. Let me just group these layers just to make it more organized. And this will be step 2. And for this step, I will be dropping in the base color of our Jello. Let me lower the opacity of the sketch a bit. Going to around 40%. And now we're going to drop in a base color. And I think it would be nice to use the selection tool for this. We'll go to the S-shaped ribbon and use the freehand selection tool. And now we can just follow the sketch and make a selection of it. I'll start here. And don't worry if it's not entirely tidy, because we can always fix things later, of course. So I'm just following that shape. And sometimes it's easier to be a bit more zoomed out when you try to make fluid lines. Until we're back at the dot. Now we have a selection of our Jello, and we can easily fill this selection with a base color. Let me try and find a nice base color. Let's be pretty dark, a bit towards the pinks. Perhaps something like this. Let me drop it in. Yeah, I think this is a great start. Let me put it in the color palette for you. And let's just check a bit. We've got some messy edges. I'm going to turn off the selection. And let me just go to the smooth lines brush, which is also in the illustration brush pack. If you don't have it, you can also use the monoline brush, which is in the calligraphy section of the Procreate standard brushes. Oh, that's too messy. I want to tidy that up. Because when you look at that pudding, you can see that it has pretty tight edges. Pretty, well, how do you call it? Sharp edges. It's not like it's fuzzy or anything. So we want some tidy shapes. We can tidy these up. And what's so great about having this shape here, this fully filled shape, is that we can use either alpha lock or layer set to clipping mask to just start painting on this shape without going outside of the edges. So what I'd like to do is just turn on alpha lock. Just want to paint on this layer. And that's because, well, the reason I'm not using clipping mask is because I want to be able to blend the colors on the layer. And if other colors are on separate layers, which are set to clipping mask, then I won't be able to blend those colors. So let me go and grab the basic flow brush. And now I want to start adding some lights and some dark areas. Now in this Jello, you can see lots of shadow areas and little lights inside of that Jello. But since our Jello is just on a flat white surface, you won't be seeing all those things, because that's like reflections or parts of that plate that it's sitting on. Or is it standing, lying? I'm not sure what a pudding does. And let's grab a darker red first. Like that. I'm gonna make the brush a bit bigger. Let's go for 50%. And I'm just looking at that reference image and trying to see where those darker areas are without looking at those little details in the center. You can see that all these lines, these blobs of color, they all follow that shape of that pudding. So I'm making diagonal strokes and some rounded ones at the top. There, let me drop that in the color palette. Now I would like to grab a lighter, brighter, saturated red for some lighter areas. Start lightening up this area here. It's pretty light. We will go lighter eventually. And I'll add lighter parts to these areas. Now, the really bright reflections that you see on the Jello, that's what really is going to add the realism to this Jello. But also these saturated reds. So this should be a nice base for our jelly pudding. Let me duplicate this group so you will be able to see the steps if you download my working file. And let me call that 3. And let me turn down the sketch a bit more. And let's go back to that layer with all the colors slapped onto it. I want to go more extreme with the lighter areas right now, because you can see that's a pink that we're seeing there. Perhaps something like this. Oh, excuse me, I forgot to drop in that color. So let's pick a pinkish color now for that area there. Go a bit smaller with my brush. I'm at 30% to paint in these really light areas. Paintings like this are always fun. It's just like with the cherries. You can very easily, with a few steps, create a realistic effect. Already trying to place some of these highlights. Following that shape of the Jello. Going a bit bigger. Just playing around with the brush size. And I can see some light on this one. I'll lighten that underside a bit. Some of that light of the white surface will reflect back up, lightening that bottom part of the Jello. And at this point you can also use the smudge tool set to the basic blender. Let me find it. Where is it? Basic set. Yeah, the basic blender. You can use that to blend the colors a bit. I'm at 30% in size right now. And since we have alpha lock turned on, we don't have to worry about the edges. Now let's start defining the shape more by adding those brighter highlights. I think it would be nice to use the light and line brush for that. And let's look at those highlights at the edges. Let me go a bit bigger. I'm at 16% for my brush. I'm just following that shape. You can turn up the opacity of your sketch if you need a bit more guidance at this point. So I'm making these light edges around those, well, bumps. And it's still not the brightest. It's a bright pink right now. We have this bright highlight over here. This is already adding more shape to our Jello. Or is it jelly? Jelly pudding? Not quite sure. Now we have this bright highlight following this part. Just use that same angle. We have a bit of a bigger spot at the top and then just follow that, like that edge. All the way down here. You can see some more lines there with highlight. They're quite, they seem a bit like scratchy. So we can start putting those in. We can also see two here. It's already starting to look more like Jello, right? Just check that out, what that just did. First we had those base colors and then we added those lighter parts and it's already starting to look really nice. So let's go to the fourth step. You're right, we're almost there actually. It's just about the tweaks now. We're gonna make the highlights brighter and let's also add a little bit of a drop shadow, very subtle. And then we really already have a realistic looking Jello. Let me just remove the sketch layer here. We're just going to work on the Jello itself. First thing I'd like to do in this step is grab the overlay brush. Oh, and of course drop in this color. Let me pick this bright red for our overlay brush. And let's just add more vibrant red to our Jello. Let me check. It's pretty low in opacity. Let's go for 40%. Go a bit bigger. Oh, maybe that's a bit too much. I'll go a bit lower in opacity again. 20%. Just adding a little bit of saturation. Maybe I want it to be a bit more pinkish. Yeah, that's looking good. Even though I'm not very fond of Jello, actually. First, let me grab this dark color and the darken line brush. So we can add some slight dark touches. I think this is a bit too dark. Let me just grab this local color. That way we can add that darkness a bit more gradually. And I don't want to add too much. You can see some dark parts here at the top. But we need to be careful not to add too much of this dark color to our Jello. But like I said, I'm not too fond of Jello actually. Not my favorite thing to eat. But it always looks so tasty. And then when I eat it, I'm always disappointed actually. I'm more of a fan of ice cream. So I was very happy earlier this week when an ice cream van drove through our street and my kids, they surprised me with an ice cream. And what was it? I had grandma's cake, the ice cream, a scoop of grandma's cake, or it was cake dough or something like that. And I had stroopwafel, typically Dutch. I think that was the best flavor. And cookies and cream, I believe. And that's always a good one, in my opinion. But yeah, I could eat ice cream every day. My parents actually sold ice cream when I was younger. It was like their side hustle, I guess. My father, he was a greengrocer, but they also had a huge fridge with ice cream and they would sell it to kids in our neighborhood. They had this flag outside of our house and then people knew that they could buy ice cream at our place. So I guess that's when the love started. There was always a supply of ice cream. I think this might be enough of the darkness, but we can always add a bit more later. I guess let's switch to the lighter parts again. So we'll pick the light and line brush and I'll go for a very light color. And let's again go over those very light edges, but now we'll also add a bit more detail. Like those very little, kind of like sparks. I'm just looking at that reference image and looking at those lightest parts. Just gonna use some hatching because that highlight, it doesn't look entirely clean. I think some hatches will look nice on it. So I'm just making these short diagonal strokes to indicate that highlight. And let's just zoom out every once in a while to check how it's looking. Because of course we want it to look good from a distance. So don't zoom in too much. And we can also switch to the lighten brush to add some of those more kind of like transparent light parts. I think I'll go for that pinkish color here. We can slightly lighten up some areas. That's too much. Let me lighten it up just slightly. Okay, let's get back to that light on line brush and that light color that we were using. And let's continue working on this part. Lightening up that highlight. And we have that highlight here, and then we have that bigger highlight there. We can lighten it up a bit more now. Still making these diagonal motions a bit like hatching. Do not make it too clean. By the way, I was thinking about doing perhaps a video about painting glass sometime soon. Perhaps something like a cocktail, like a glass with liquid. Cocktail has that nice summer vibe, so perhaps I'll do something like this. But you can always leave your thoughts on that in the comment section or at Discord, or send me a message. Or if you have a favorite cocktail, one that you really think I should be painting for that tutorial, then let me know and you might inspire me. Go to the next. While I'm working on this, I'm already thinking about all the great jelly puddings that I'll be seeing in the community section and on Discord. I'm sure you'll all make great pieces. You can see that those bright highlights, that's really what's giving this Jello that realistic feel. Because the Jello has a very reflective surface. I do think I want to add a little bit more dark areas. Work on that a bit more, but let me just add a drop shadow first. So we'll make a new layer, put the Jello on top, and let me just use the basic flow brush. So we're gonna add, well, a drop shadow, not just a drop shadow, but also this Jello, it'll reflect a bit on the surface it's on. Well, light will be going through the Jello and leave, in this case, leave a red kind of reflection. Because the light that's shining through the Jello will turn red a bit. And also not just the light that's going through it, but also the light that's bouncing off of it will also leave red reflections. Let me use Gaussian blur to slightly blur that layer. And we can also use the smudge tool to soften it a little bit. Now we need some more here, otherwise it'll look like it's floating. Let's check what it looks like. Yeah, you can see it feels way more grounded like this with that slight red drop shadow color reflection. That looks a lot better. Let me lighten up that area a little bit more. I'll go to the light and line brush again, and that light color, a little bit more of a light edge here. Alright, now let me just add a little bit more dark parts. We can do that by using the multiply brush. And let's just pick that base Jello color. Perhaps 6%. Is that too much? Maybe it's too big. Maybe 3%. I just want to add a little bit more dark parts to give an extra boost to those light parts actually. And now I'd also like to add a little bit more of those, well, those bright reds. I'm using the overlay brush and that bright red. Let me lower the size, perhaps 6%. Well, let's go smaller, 2%. For some bright reds. Let me just grab the basic flow brush here. I want to add like that little highlight. I like that in there. I'm going to make this a bit darker. And then I can add a bright red there. Now, finally, let me just add a few more of those light touches using the light and line brush. And I just want to add some light specks to the bottom area. I'm using little dabs. Because that area, it's a bit less smooth. So you see lots of these little highlights. Well, I guess you can just keep making these tiny tweaks. But overall, I think we have a pretty nice looking Jello here. And I'm sure you'll create a lovely Jello. I think it looks delicious, but I'm sure that if I would eat it again, I would be disappointed. Just give me an ice cream. Well, we can go over the steps. Again, let's check what we did. So we started with a basic sketch, and then we added those base colors with just some little light areas and dark areas. Then we started adding more highlights using the light and line brush. And then, well, some magic happened, I guess. We added more bright reds with the overlay brush. We added that kind of shadow, reflected light, and lots of bright highlights because Jello has a very reflective surface. I hope you had fun following this Jello tutorial, and I'm really looking forward to seeing your work. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I'm always here to help, and I'm looking forward to talking to you. Wishing you a wonderful day.